Hi, I'm Gary Striegler, and this is the third video that I've done in my series on building a bathroom vanity cabinet. And in this video, I'm going to talk about actually assembling the box. In the last video, we looked at cutting all the pieces out for the box. So here's the bottom of the cabinet put together. And as you can see, there's 4 partitions, which go all the way to the ground. Here's where I've notched for the toe kick. And these shelves, which are the bottom of the cabinet, fit in between the partitions. Again, I used an 1/8 inch dado for alignment and a concealed joint, and then used pocket screws to get the strength out of those joints. Now, this is one of the pocket screws that I use. It's an 1 1/8 pocket screw out here. An 1 1/8 is important because if I use an 1 1/4 with that 1/8 inch dado, that tip of that screw is going to come out. You could use 1 inch, but I really like they get a little more holding, a little more pull power out of these 1 1/8 than their screws they get from custom service hardware. So here's a look at the bottom of the cabinet. It's all put together. The length of all these shelves came right off my story pole. Now I'm going to stand the cabinet up. And here's the picture of it from the back. I cut these stretcher rails and pocket screwed them in between the partitions. Now the length for each of these stretcher rails I got by coming down here and measuring the distance in between, because these 2 pieces should be parallel. And I've used a couple of pocket screws to hold them in place. These generally I just make out of whatever kind of scrap I can find around the shop. This is about a 2 1/2, almost 3 inch piece of plywood that I've used. And I was talking earlier about the fact that all this needs to line up. You can see all these line up, the bottoms line up, and the only thing that sticks to the back are the 2 side cabinets where I've made that 3/8 by 3/8 rebate for the plywood back to fit in. So I came all the way across. I did on the very last one of my stretcher rails, measured outside to outside the cabinet, and then just made sure that I cut the last stretcher rail so that the cabinet's exactly the same across the back. So the next thing I want to do is put the 1/4 inch plywood back in, which actually gives a lot of strength to the cabinet, but it also straightens the cabinet. And I'll be using a staple to shoot into all these parts to hold the plywood back on. By the way, this stretcher rail also is what I use to screw when I mount the cabinet to the wall. I don't use a 1/4 inch crown staple gun to nail my back on anymore. I actually use this as sort of like a tar paper staple gun. But what I found is with the 1/4 inch crown gun, by the time the staple sets, it's almost all the way through that 1/4 inch plywood back. Now you can overcome that if you want to use a 1/4 inch crown by just holding your nail gun a little bit of an angle. But I like to use this gun. Now I use more staples, but it doesn't really matter because they're not seen on the back. Now the back is cut to go from the bottom of the shelf up to the top. And so when I line that top, all the top of my verticals up with this piece of plywood, it's going to straighten the cabinet. I need to flip this. Yeah, here we go. This is also squaring the cabinet up when I do this. Need to rack it just a little bit. So now I'm pulling this piece of plywood up to where the top of the piece of plywood is even with the top of this vertical piece. Just go down through here, line each of those out real quick. So now that I've straightened it out by lining all of them up, I'll just go around the whole rest of the cabinet, shooting staples in like that. Probably a staple about every 4 inches, coming up each of these and across the back, and that's going to tie the whole cabinet together. Then the next thing I'm going to do is build a face frame and attach the face frame to the cabinet.